It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
And welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast, talking property news right around Australia, of course, 7 days a week, as heard on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. How was your weekend? I trust that if you were transacting with property that you might have been successful. It is a Monday, back into another working week, June the 17th. Of course, the RBA announcement is coming up tomorrow. Now, the southeast Queensland coastal pockets, including Noosa, Redland and the Gold Coast and Brisbane, have been ranked as the state's top areas for well-being in the Cities and Regions Wellbeing Index by SGS Economics and Planning. Now, this was reported the other day by Domain. These areas benefit from beachfront access, nature and close-knit communities, and the subtropical climate significantly contributes to health and wellness. And the index evaluates regions based on economy, income, employment, skills, housing, also health, equality, community balance, that's pretty important, and the environment. So this morning we are welcoming into the Real Estate Breakfast Michelle Tjondro from SGS Economics and Planning. And good morning to you, Michelle. Good to have a chat about this and find out a little bit more about your report.
Yes, morning, Craig, and thank you for having me today.
It's a good one to talk about, because if you have a look at higher prices, which is these are the house prices, often it correlates with higher well-being. And I think the report throws up Noosa as one of those locations. Now, if you're in the higher price bracket and you're sitting there in a home that's worth a couple of $1 million, there's no reason why you shouldn't be feeling a little bit more better than somebody that might be renting. It all makes sense.
Yeah, I think, since releasing the Cities and Regions Wellbeing Index earlier this year, there's been a lot of commentary around what it might cost to live in areas with higher wellbeing. And, Noosa, Douglas, Brisbane, those areas of Queensland are certainly areas that performed better on overall wellbeing. That means that they performed well in a combination of factors. So it wasn't just, the way that they performed on, let's say, wellbeing and equality, but they might have good access to health services, and so they performed better on that front as well. So it's really the combination of factors that affects holistic wellbeing.
Yeah, and subtropical climate, this is quite interesting because, as I said, it significantly contributes to the health and wellness. And we talk quite a bit about Hervey Bay. That has won, I think it is a couple of times now, in a survey for the most happiest place in Australia.
Yeah, that's a really, interesting point. And areas in Queensland that have a higher proportion of land and natural reserve, they performed really well on the environmental dimension of the index. In our daily lives, we can certainly recognise that where we have access to these open spaces and sparkling blue waters, these contribute to our overall well-being. What we didn't consider in our research was things like life satisfaction and social cohesion. If you speak to residents of these areas, they will often share stories about the sense of community and belonging that they, connect with on a daily basis in their communities. And I think, we can't forget that that's a really important influence on overall well-being as well.
Yeah, just in terms of, let's say somebody is in a one-bedroom small apartment in Sydney paying a very high rent for that little space. It's very small, they're contained in the apartment block, as opposed to somebody that is living subtropically, got quite a bit of land around them to enjoy. These are two different sort of edges of the sword.
Yeah, that's correct. What we found in our research was that in many, big cities around Australia, that rental affordability was quite poor compared to regional areas. And so that can certainly have an impact on people's well-being. But what we also know is that people make financial trade-offs to live in centrally located areas so that they have access to education and health services. And so what we saw was that in many cities, overall well-being still was reasonably high, but when you look at the housing dimension specifically, it didn't perform as well as other regional areas where rental affordability and choice of housing might be a bit more affordable.
Yeah, we'll get to that rental affordability in just a moment, but in terms of the report for well-being, what's the worst place to be?
I don't have the specific local government area in front of me right now, but what we did find was that in many regional areas, how they performed on access to health services, quality of housing. In some regional areas, the regional economies are smaller as well, and all of these are contributing to lower overall well-being compared to other areas in Australia.
So the rental affordability, which you touched on, just how much of a factor did that shine through with your report?
Yeah, well, we found that rental affordability, there was a big spatial divide between our urban and regional areas in terms of rental affordability. And, that's really concerning from a policy perspective because what you gain in more affordable rentals, it may mean that you are now sacrificing paying for necessary health services or education. And that's really interesting because it may mean that there are long-term implications for other dimensions of well-being.
Your report talked about the economy and income as well as employment and also, of course, health, which you've also touched on. But the economy, it's such a big driver, isn't it? Not all economies from different states are running at the same speed. You look at Perth. Perth's local economy there is fantastic. How much of a factor did that play in your reporting?
It certainly played a big factor in terms of the urban regional divide, where we saw that in urban areas, the performance on the economy dimension was better because there's larger, more diverse economies. In some regional areas, such as in Western Australia or Queensland, for example, they have industry strengths in mining, and so that's contributing to their higher economic performance. In those same locations, they sometimes did not perform very well on the wellbeing and community dimension, and specifically on the gender pay gap indicator, because where you've got, a high concentration of the mining industry, this is not an industry that has traditionally had a lot of female representation, and it's also a higher paying industry. And so we're seeing that there's quite a large gender pay gap in some of these regional areas in Queensland and Western Australia.
And having a look at the housing shortage is one of the main drivers for a rental affordability in the way that is just skyrocketed over the last couple of years. It is not likely that is going to improve anytime soon because of the amount of immigration, people that are moving into the country. There's just not enough houses to actually house everybody. And of course, it's a trickle-down effect. As soon as more migration happens, it then takes more of that supply, particularly rental supply, out of the market because these people can afford it. And it pushes people downstream because it will get worse, right?
So the temporal dimension of rental affordability is something that we're really keen to monitor over time. So the Cities and Regions Wellbeing Index is an annual publication. What we've reported on is what we found for 2023. But I think what it really highlights is, the need to sort of recalibrate spatial equity across the nation. We should be thinking about how we can improve wellbeing in areas that are more affordable to rent. So they may be more affordable but performed less well in other dimensions like health and wellbeing and community. So I think it's really important to take that lens across the nation.
So you would really like people to think about well-being, and that's easier said than done, particularly over the last few years, of course, of what we have gone through. People struggling to pay their mortgages, struggling to pay their rents. It's probably a long way down the list in terms of well-being. People just don't think about it necessarily.
Yeah, I do think it's a relatively recent phenomenon that governments and policymakers and even wider community are thinking about well-being more deeply. And I guess what we emphasise in our research is that there are many paths to prosperity. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to improving well-being. What works for one community isn't guaranteed to work for another. It really depends on the needs of community, the history of investment, how that community interacts with external environments and the wider economy. But, what this index provides is a way for us to access some of the evidence to identify where policy and programs haven't, been as successful in meeting community needs in the past. And, in 5 or 10 years' time, when we're looking at, what the index reports in the future, what we'd really hope to see is that some of the local government areas that performed less well this year, that they've now improved, their performance on many of the dimensions of wellbeing. So, we really encourage people to think about it holistically and think about the fact that there are so many influences that go into one's overall wellbeing.
Yeah, think about it holistically, yes. And I guess for people that go and see psychologists about all of their problems, it's a big talking point, of course, from psychologists saying, well, we've got to look at your well-being, and they break it all down. So a lot of this sort of gets captured when people go and talk to people, but they don't necessarily think about it on their own. And how long have these reports been going for?
Yeah, so this is the second year that we've released the Cities and Regions Wellbeing Index. Last year we released it for the first time, recognising that there was a research gap because, this is the only objective wellbeing framework that's available at such a detailed spatial scale for all of Australia. And our ambition was really to, encourage everyone to engage with this topic for the reason that it really affects all of us. And so to make this research really accessible, we've actually developed an interactive dashboard. You can jump onto our website and anyone can explore what wellbeing looks like in your local neighbourhood, but also to see how that compares to other areas right around Australia.
And what is the name? What's the address for the website?
Yeah, so if you Google SGS Cities and Regions Wellbeing Index, that should take you straight to our webpage. We've got an insights report that's sitting there, as well as the interactive dashboard.
Fantastic, Michelle. Great to find out a little bit about your work and what you are doing there. Yes, I think we can all agree our well-being has got to sort of amp up a little bit, There's so many of us that are really struggling, and well-being is right in the core of how we feel. Hey, thanks for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast this morning, and good luck with further reports moving forward.
Thanks very much, Craig.
It's the Real Estate Podcast, talking properties from 6 a.m. every day, from every corner of the Australian real estate market. Explore new property destinations where you could live with exclusive interviews covering real estate news and market insights.
So that's the challenge for real estate agents now, is to secure good quality stock, or indeed any stock. Every product that hits the market, we've got 40 or 50 active buyers. I'm not talking about people coming to the home open. I'm talking about people that are just about prepared to put an offer on that as soon as it hits the market.
I left mid-April, and I spent 1 month in Tagazout, Morocco, and I work a regular, schedule. So I get my mornings and early afternoons free, and then I get on with my work day and work into the evening, and then go have a little dinner and then catch back up with work, and I'm off to bed. So there you go.
Let's go cheap, Mario. Apartment, how much?
Oh, well, apartment, look, you can buy apartments in the 300 range in the newer areas. We're talking cheap. So 300 plus, 400,000 and beyond would get you into the marketplace for something.
Remember, we are not a real estate company. We are 100% all about increasing your awareness and knowledge for buying and selling properties. We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.